Welcome to episode number 89 of Off the Shelf. I am very pleased to welcome Charles Paisley to the Off the Shelf podcast. Charles is a minister, was formerly a lifelong message follower of William Branham. He was raised in Raymond Jackson's message church, who was known or referred to by William Branham as Junior Jackson in Jeffersonville, Indiana. And Charles became assistant pastor of the church in the years after Raymond Jackson died. Charles is senior manager of a large technology department in Louisville, Kentucky. He is a researcher and a writer on the subject of Indiana history. Charles was the editor of the Contender magazine, which had thousands of subscribers in the message. He has traveled internationally and has visited dozens of message churches. His family has been in the message for decades and attended the Branham Tabernacle, while William Branham was still living. Charles personally knew and has been acquainted with many witnesses of William Branham's life and ministry, including personal friends and acquaintances who knew William Branham all the way back to the 1930s, years before he gained international fame and even before he was married and had children. Charles is currently a minister at the Gospel Church of Jeffersonville, where he is working with other former message believers and former message ministers to help people leaving the message find community and support as they exit the message, and most importantly, to help people have a healthy relationship with Jesus Christ. Charles, welcome to Off the Shelf.
Thanks for having me, Rod. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to having a good conversation with you today.
Charles, can you give our listeners a bit of background on yourself? When did you come into the message?
So I was born into the message. So there's a phrase I've heard before called born on the bench. I think that about describes me, Rod. I was born on the bench. I was born to parents who were also lifelong message believers. My mother was born while my grandparents were still in attendance at the tabernacle during Brother Branham's lifetime. My father's family came into the message in the 60s. So my great-grandparents were in the message too. My entire family, aunts, uncles, cousins. So I'm a lifer. I was born in Canada. I'm actually Canadian, New Brunswick, Canada.
Can you sing the national anthem?
The opposite side of the country from you. Oh, Canada, right? Boy, I don't even know if all the Canadians know all the words.
Well, they keep changing our words to make them more... Our prime minister is one of the more politically correct people in the political sphere in the world. They keep changing the national anthem to more gender neutral, to make it more inclusive. And, so we've lost all the history, but we do have a more politically correct national anthem now.
Yeah. So as a young boy, I lived in Canada. I went to a church pastored by my grandfather, actually, who was also a message preacher, and my great grandfather was a message preacher. I got uncles that are message preachers. Lots of message preachers in the family. My parents moved to here in the Jeffersonville area, back where my grandparents live here in 1990, and so I've lived here in the Jeffersonville area since 1990. So that's kind of my background. Grew up at Faith Assembly, grew up at Raymond Jackson's church. We had lots of old timers there, knew lots of people, loved the message. Just the message was my life.
Yeah, well, as it was mine.
Yeah. It's almost like an old friend now, when I think back on it. There's so much about, in some ways there's aspects of it you miss, so then there's aspects of it, we're glad I've moved on. But so just love the message, and obviously enough to give my life to it in the way I did. I, preached the message, took care of the Contender, just gave my whole life to the church and good works and such, for all the years that I was
there. So were
you
born into the message, or did you come in, or did your parents come in where you were young?
No, my parents were. I was in the message from birth. My parents, was in the message from their whole lives as well.
Because your grandparents were in the message.
Exactly. My grandparents and my great grandparents converted into the message at different times, but they came into the message. My grandparents. So my grandfather. Before my grandparents married, my grandfather had known of William Branham and had some contact. When they got married in 1960, my grandparents started attending the tabernacle very frequently, regularly shortly after that. So that's about the time my family, the oldest members of my family, came into the message.
So you were not only a follower of William Branham, but you were also a follower of Raymond Jackson or Junior Jackson. Years ago, and it is a long time ago, because our kids, I think we might have one or two kids at the time, and we had a couple of young men from the Philippines who I actually visited in Manila just before the pandemic, and they're now out of the message, but they were staying at our house, and I remember them reading me a passage from the book of Daniel, and they looked at me and said, "What do you think this means?" And I said, "Well, what do you want me to think it means?" And they indicated that something that William Branham had said about the 70 weeks of Daniel was incorrect, and that they indicated that God had allowed William Branham to say something that was incorrect so that it would fool people who were not really believers. And it was one of the stranger conversations I had with someone from another, say, subsect in the message. And I remember that their logic completely escaped me, because I just figured, if God is trying to fool me, it's going to work. So from your perspective, what are the distinctives of the Jackson movement? I don't know how you refer to yourselves.
So we called ourselves message believers. We were the heirs of the message. We were the message. Like we use the exact same terminology probably as your group.
Although we would have referred to you guys as the Junior Jackson followers.
Yeah, we would call your group the Branhamites, and so we believed you were the apostates and we had the genuine.
Well, of course, every group inside.
I
mean, it's strange. Every subsect inside the message thinks the other guys are all wrong, and they got the real truth.
Right.
So how did, if you look at the Jackson movement, how did it differ, or what are unique doctrines from their perspective?
Sure. So I guess kind of knowing the history of how we split off from all the rest of them kind of maybe helps explain that a little bit. And so Brother Jackson had a dream very shortly after Brother Branham died. Dreams featured very prominently in Brother Jackson's ministry, and they were of a sense of prophetic dreams, I guess is how we look at them. And he had a dream that he got like an ordination certificate in the mail, and ordained him as an apostle, and it was signed William Marion Branham. And so he believed he was the apostolic successor of William Branham. We believed in having a fivefold ministry, and as time progressed, he was the head of that. We would refer to him as the chief apostle of the fivefold ministry, and so that was his position within the group. So we started actually separating from the main groups very early on. Brother Jackson preached at Brother Branham's funeral. He was one of the speakers at the funeral. He was still in quite tight, right when Brother Branham died. But like at Brother Branham's funeral, Lee Vale and Raymond Jackson had a falling out right at the funeral over whether or not William Branham would raise from the dead, right? So shortly after Brother Branham's death, the divisions are kind of starting with us and the other sects. So that happens. Then Brother Jackson does a lot of missionary journeys.
So just to go back, 60s. Lee Vale believed that William Branham would raise from the dead?
Yes, at the time. And so obviously I wasn't there, but this is the story that's passed down to us. Yeah, Lee Vale was insistent at that time that William Branham would raise from the dead. And Lee Vale actually preached a message at the tabernacle the week after the funeral. So we're told that the grace age had ended, no more souls could be saved, and Christ was off the mercy seat, and the rapture was basically imminent. And all this kind of led up into the initial separation from us in Lee Vale's group. because obviously Brother Jackson didn't believe any of that. Then you kind of come down the road, and Brother Jackson's doing a lot of his mission work, and so late 60s, early 70s, he does especially a lot in North America and in Europe. And there was a man named Brother Larson from the Tabernacle who was from Norway, and they partnered together to do a lot of church planning and spreading the message into Europe. And what would happen is they would go around and they would have revivals, and then Perry Green would follow behind and kind of pick off the churches and bring them over into his sect. So Brother Jackson and Perry Green start having their falling out in those years, as Perry Green kind of trails behind him and, steals churches, you might say.
Keep stealing.
So by the early 70s, we fell out with Perry Green and that lot. And so that kind of, these things kept proceeding. And by the time you get into the 80s, early 80s, we had more or less kept peace with the Tabernacle crowd and, the main group. But when Sister Branham died, kind of all of the goodwill between Faith Assembly and the Tabernacle, a lot of that dried up. I think for Sister Branham's sake, that's what held a lot of that together, because Sister Branham still liked Brother Jackson. They got along well, and it kind of maintained peace between the two groups. But after that, basically there was almost a complete separation, and we no longer even spoke to the Tabernacle crowd. So by the 80s is when things have really separated there. And a lot of the problems there was around, so I'm sure you know about Fred Sothman and the ones who believed William Branham was God incarnate, the Simpson family, the McGuire family. There's quite a few people actually here in the Jeffersonville who do believe that William Branham is God incarnate, and if you run into them, they'll say things like, "It's a beautiful day Brother Branham has given us today, isn't it?" Right? Like you run into the post. So,
wow.
Anyways, that kind of stuff just kind of fed into our kind of division away from it, because at the time we weren't as crazy as they were, at least. So that's kind of how we spun it anyway. But some of the distinctives coming out of that, and I look back, we didn't believe that William Branham preached the revelation of the seventh seal. Like, that's one thing. We just didn't believe he had the revelation of the seventh seal. And we didn't believe he ever preached the seven thunders. So those are two huge differences from us and the rest, because obviously all the other groups believe he preached the seventh seal, right, and the seven thunders. And, I've kind of, having left, struggled trying to understand how we arrived at that conclusion. But there's kind of this unspoken rule that we in our sect did not believe anything that William Branham preached after 1963. That we didn't believe anything he preached in 64, didn't believe anything he preached in 65. We really don't even believe what he preached the second half of 63 after the seal. So it's a little strange there.
So you're kind of opposite to the way, because there's this concept at least in my sect, which we said we were in the message, but I've heard it referred to as the bride coming subsect of the message. But we had this concept of progressive revelation. So William Branham often said two different things about the same thing, or he had two opinions, right? So he taught this, and then after the seals, that was when you could say, okay, you could bank on this, because he might have got it mixed up. Because, early in his ministry, he believed in Trinity. You can find references to him referring to the Trinity as being, a good way to believe. So you're kind of the opposite of progressive revelation, which I'm not sure what you call it, degressive revelation.
So we would say we believe in progressive revelation, but I guess only up to an extent, right? There's this just this unusual thing that I never fully understood why it was this way. I think that Brother Jackson may have started to have a little bit of falling out with William Branham, perhaps in the last year or two of his life that led to this. But we didn't believe marriage and divorce. We didn't believe the heavenly home. We didn't believe stature of a perfect man.
So you didn't really like Clarence
order,
Larkin.
That was a big one. He didn't. He basically didn't. So Brother Branham actually gave Brother Jackson copies of Clarence Larkin's book. So Brother Jackson had always known what he did, which I eventually found out. maybe we'll talk more about that. But so the way we did it, or I should say the way Brother Jackson did it, and this kind of goes back to that initial comment you talked about those brothers from the Philippines. So Brother Jackson, from very early on, he had this doctrine, this teaching. He called it the fan is in his hand. And Brother Jackson took a prophecy of John the Baptist, where John the Baptist said, speaking of Christ, said his fan is in his hand and he will thoroughly purge his floor, referring to how Christ would separate, the chaff and the wheat. So Brother Jackson takes that prophecy and he applies it to William Branham, and he says that the way this will work is that William Branham will preach doctrine, and this doctrine will be used to separate people. Some of the doctrine will be good doctrine, some of the doctrine will be bad doctrine. And the good doctrine, will blow the good seed right, and then the bad doctrine will blow the chaff away. And so, of course, Brother Jackson could then, explain to us what was good doctrine and what was not good doctrine. And so he used this. This is the glue that held the message together for us. This is how we could selectively say, well, we don't believe church order. We don't believe heavenly home, right? But we do believe the first 5 seals, right? Or this or that. And so that kind of set up this weird thing where we selectively accepted parts of the message and rejected other parts.
But the person who decided what you accepted or rejected was Raymond Jackson.
That's right.
But,
yeah.
There's nothing I'm aware of thinking in the Gospels that John the Baptist ever said that you could say, well, this is what happened to John the Baptist. He confused people, and that's a very bizarre way of thinking.
Yeah. So looking back, of course, obviously, this makes absolutely no sense, right? Because God can't inspire someone to preach both right and wrong, right? If somebody's preaching wrong, well, clearly, that's not divinely inspired. So it kind of breaks down because, the Apostle Paul even talked about, if the gospel would profit because of my dishonesty, then how can God be just, yeah. Right? So there's no way that God really could work that way. That was just that's just his way, I think, of making sense of all of the dual statements and deciding what he would reject and what he would keep and try to keep everything into a sensible package. I think that at the end of the day, that really kind of gave us a kind of a distinctive set of doctrines and mm-hmm. teachings as a result that's a little bit different from the rest of the message. And I think that in Brother Jackson's mind, that blowing people away and making them go off into strange doctrines turned into overdrive in the last years of William Branham's ministry.
So as the preeminent apostle, and according to the New Testament, the gifts are first apostles, then prophets. So did he effectively set himself up above William Branham?
So we did not believe William Branham had a New Testament ministry. So we believed he had an Old Testament prophet type ministry. So we completely separated him from the New Testament ministry. And so we believe that when he came back to restore the hearts of the Father, he came back to restore a true ministry, right? So he accomplished this in his prophetic role. And now these people who've had their hearts turned back to the Father are now a second generation, a new generation of original apostolic quality leaders, ordained by William Branham.
So that's very bizarre because they're basically, and this is, of course, one of the big problems I have with the message, and certainly with significant bits of evangelicalism as it currently exists worldwide, which is people take bits of the old covenant and bring them into the new. Where Paul was very clear in the book of Galatians and the author of Hebrews saying, when he calls it new, he makes the old one is old, and what is old is obsolete and will soon disappear. So it's not that it's wrong it's not that it's not true, but I like to use the example of of the iPhone. I had an iPhone 1, but I don't use it anymore. Was the iPhone 1 good? It was wonderful. It did stuff that nothing else could do at the time. But now I've got, I've got an iPhone 12. I wouldn't go back to my iPhone 1. Why? Because the iPhone 1 is obsolete. So the writer of Hebrews really says, look, if you're looking to the old covenant, it's obsolete. It's disappearing. And it should be completely gone by now. But we keep seeing people wanting to take the old covenant and bring it into the law, into the new, which we see in the message, as far as dress. We see it in, references that William Branham made to tithing, to references that ministers had to marry a virgin. And where do you get that in the new covenant? It's all of the old covenant, and you get it by saying ministers now are the same as the Levitical priesthood, and all of those rules apply, which is a very bizarre way of looking at things.
Yeah, it's a mouthful there. So you've got definitely issues when you try to bring the law into grace, right? And issues that obviously we probably can't talk through in this amount of time, but there's definitely, we have a new covenant, we have grace under the new covenant, and we've got a new paradigm that we live by rather than the law. And you're right. The way that they go back and they would bring an Old Testament style prophet into the New Testament, it's hard to see how they can do that and justify that really in a scriptural way. And of course, we know the way that they manage to do that is through the Malachi prophecy, right?
So, which, if people want to look, all you have to do is look at Malachi 1, verse 1, which says, the word of the Lord to Israel and not to Gentiles. But, that's easily overlooked.
Brother Jackson, on that topic, so one of Brother Jackson's claims to fame was he knew William Branham was Elijah before anybody else, or pretty well. That was the implication. That was one of Brother Jackson's kind of boasts, I guess you might say, to us, because that was, he believed he recognized William Branham was the Elijah from the first time he heard his name, and it was actually based on that scripture, and so that was a big part of his testimony and basis that he went on. So we got to hear that quite a bit during our lives.
And the way, which I think you said earlier, the way you looked on everybody else in the message was that basically they're apostate because they didn't have the right revelation of the message that you guys, who were properly revelated, had.
Exactly. We believed you were, it's very Gnostic, right? We believed you were saved and by your revelation. Your revelation is what made you the bride of Christ versus a lost sinner or another category. And our sect, Brother Jackson's sect at the high point was a good sized group of people. But yeah, we were never in any ways a majority of the message. And we did tend to look at all the rest as people who had been confused. And we believe that they were purposefully confused by God, and that William Branham had did it on purpose by preaching wrong things to them.
Wow. That is hard to get one's head around. So you knew Raymond Jackson. What kind of a man was he?
So, in a personal sense, Raymond Jackson was who he was off the platform and who he was on the platform were two very different personalities. I don't know if you noticed that with most message preachers, but with him, it was very much the case. On the platform, he was a very bold speaker, and he could do a lot of things that, looking back now, is a bit unusual. But in private, in person, he was a fairly nice person, easy to get along with, a fairly gentle man. He definitely had a lot of good personal qualities to him, right? So I certainly wouldn't, spurn him. I think he lived in many ways a life that, in a personal sense, you could say is a good life to look to as an example, right? Like there was no kind of unclean living or anything like that ever really could be attached to him. But in terms of his preaching, he got to the point towards the end where he could be he could cut people off and tear people down pretty quick and pretty easy. And he did quite a lot of that in the later years in his life. But he was a person who was very deeply committed to his faith, and for the message, he loved it. I mean, he gave his life to it.
And
right?
he thought he was right,
say?
and everybody else is wrong.
Pretty much, yeah. And if you're wrong, you're in trouble.
So, fear is something that is an underlying theme in all of the various subcults in the message. I don't know one where fear isn't predominant. It's the way that people are held into the message to some extent. How did fear play out amongst the Jackson movement?
So, it took a lot of different levels, honestly. So I mentioned we didn't believe that Raymond or William Branham had the revelation of the thunders or the seven seals. Even though ironically he said he had them in the later years. Somehow, looking back now, it's still hard for me to wrap my mind around how we arrived at that. But we believed that we were on the edge of our seats waiting to hear the revelation of the thunders.
It was coming any moment.
And once we heard those thunders, they'd come at any minute. And when they came, it was going to be the end of the world, and we were going to have the rapture. And so we lived in constant anticipation, right? And you didn't want to miss a church service. You didn't want to be on the outside, right? And that was used as something really to keep everybody on the inside. You don't know what you're going to miss if you don't get to church, And so we never missed church. We always went to church because, that could be the service that the seven thunders, was made known to us. So we never knew. So that kept everybody super in. And if you didn't hear the thunders, you weren't going to make it, right? If you didn't hear the thunders, you weren't going to make it. That's what
so
we believe.
If the thunders were revealed and you happened to have to work that night, you were out. You were gone.
You're in trouble, right? And we believe there might be like a little space of time there between the thunders and the rapture, right? Where, maybe the people who were out sick that Sunday, they could hear it and get around a little bit. But you didn't have a whole lot of time, right? From the time those thunders happened to getting out of here, it was going to have to be, so you better show up to church, right? So that kind of kept everybody, on edge's seat. And so the other piece of it, though, is towards the end of his life, about 1993, Brother Jackson started preaching that the rapture would happen. The week of Daniel would happen in the year 2005. The week of Daniel was supposed to start in 2005. And we, of course, was taught and believed that the rapture would happen at the start of the week of Daniel. So we for years went through believing, the end of the world is coming, roughly in this time frame. I should pull off my shelf. I got some of the charts and the actual printouts of some of that stuff where he had said that. And so as that gets closer, right, we have this criteria that we've got to meet to make the rapture, right? And we've got to be ready by then or we're going to be left behind, And so there's different things we have to do in our lives to get ready. So it's all about this. I grew up, always paranoid. Do I have enough of what it takes to go in the rapture, right? And I sure better be here when we have the thunders. And Brother Jackson had this dream, like prophetic dreams kind of really featured in a lot to his stuff. He had this dream where he's in a big room and like an auditorium, and to get into this auditorium, you had to have a little bottle of anointing oil, which represented, you had to have just this right Holy Ghost experience and all of the criteria met. So you could only get in there if you had the right stuff. And then once we were in there, Brother Branham appeared on stage and gave us this wonderful something, which he couldn't remember what it was, but whatever this wonderful thing was, what was going to more or less take us out of the world. And so we more or less, that was always interpreted that you had to have this, whatever this perfect thing was, in order to get in to hear the thunders. And if you didn't even have this, then you were going to be knocked out before the thunders come. and you're going to miss everything. And so we just lived our whole life trying to make sure we were in this state where we get the thunders and we could get the rapture. It was really unusual. And so towards about the year 2000, it wasn't apparent to me, but it started to become apparent to other people, especially some of the other key ministers in our sect of the message, that the world was not going to end by 2005.
So when did Junior Jackson pass away?
Yeah. He died in December of 2004, 6 months before, right? 6 months before his date came. Yeah, that was really something. And so about 2004, or rather 2000, some of the people, certain ministers started to distance themselves a little bit from the prediction. And looking back now, I realize what started to transpire at this point. Brother Jackson started having this belief that if you wanted to hear the thunders and you wanted to go, we all had to be in perfect unity. And this is when things really started to get very tough. And at that point, that was used to target, at first, the preachers who had harbored doubts about 2004 and a half. And, they found different reasons that they weren't in unity with them, and they were, ran off for that cause. And this just kept going, though, right? So we're set up now, unless we're in perfect unity, we're not going to be able to hear the thunders. We're not going to be able to go in the rapture. And so it starts to get really terrible at that point in our part of the message, and things start to get very divisive, and, people are being basically scared they're going to go to hell, thrown out of the church, families separated. It gets really ugly.
People were thrown out of the church?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we probably... So in those years between 2000 and 2004, about half of the global fellowship was done away with.
Disfellowship, they either left or they were asked to leave. Disfellowship.
Exactly. So in just those few years, about half of the global fellowship fell off at that point. And then when Brother Jackson died, we had a few years there. Well, we had 6 months to his date came and went, and he had put in there a couple years of leeway. He said, "Well, I could be off a year or two, right?" And so 2005 ended, nothing happened. 2006 ended, nothing happened. 2007 ended, nothing happened, and now it's 2008. And everybody at that point realizes something is wrong with, Brother Jackson's math. And so all the preachers that are left, they come up with different ways to try and fix the problem, right? So like one preacher in Canada comes up with one way to fix the calculations. A preacher in Alabama comes up with another way to fix them. A preacher in Arizona comes up with another way. Preachers in Africa come up with different ways to fix it. Preachers in Europe come up with different ways to fix it. Just every preacher is coming up with a different way to fix the calculations. And so and our pastor, of course, that took over after Raymond Jackson died, he's come up with his way to fix the calculations. The problem is everybody has a different way to fix it. Okay? And now they all come back together, and we all got to be in perfect unity, or we're not going to make it. And everybody has the right answer, but nobody agrees. And it was like an atomic bomb. And I can chuckle about it a little bit, but it was a horrific experience to live through that time. What fell out from that.
I know how bad it was when our church started to implode. I couldn't sleep. I didn't sleep for months and months. It was just because you knew there's something terribly wrong. And I mean, with us, it was sin and sin that, you just kind of go, this is not possible. This happens in the Catholic Church. This happens in denomination. It doesn't happen in my church. We are the last voice. William Branham was the last voice to the last age. We believe his message. And how does this happen? It's just messed up. And it's
for me. So at this point, and me and most everyone I know, we still believe Brother Jackson somehow had to be right? Like we cognitively dissonantly dealt with that somehow. But the way that we got through it was by basically mass division. The group broke into about 7 different sects at that point, with all different men claiming to be the leaders. A lot of our families were broken up. And for us, that means you can never see or speak to these people ever again. And so we lost a whole lot of I lost most of my family at that point as far as relationships when we went through that period. A lot of marriages were broken up. They would even pressure, if a husband went one way and a wife another, they'd pressure divorces. So it was really awful.
Ministers are going to be held to account for this. As James says, I think it's James chapter 3, he says, brothers, not many of you should seek to be teachers because we will be held to a higher standard. There's going to be much more strict judgment on, and we saw it. Pastor breaks up a marriage for a whim. And then even in the same family, you have, okay, this guy was divorced, the woman was divorced, the man was divorced, they got married, so that shouldn't happen. But then you got in the same family, man divorced, woman divorced, they get married, and it's okay. It's all based on opinion. It's not based on any kind of standard.
Yeah, it's just whatever, makes the leader happy at that moment. Let me look on my shelf real quick. I think I have, let me look real quick. If I got that tape, I'll just pull it out and show you. I think I've got it here somewhere. Oh, sorry if I step away for a second. I don't see it.
No, we can still hear you.
I wish I did. I'd pull it out. I'd pull it off and show you the tape that has that has those charts and some of those things on it, but for the end, I can't remember right where I have it filed.
Well, maybe what you could do is, if you find them, send me a copy and I'll post it on the website so that people who listen can download and take a look at it.
Yeah, let me do that. I know I have a photograph of it I can share, but the thing is the chart with this date and stuff, we posted it in our churches for years, right? Like it's still in there's still a chart in the church at Faith Assembly that points to the end of the world at 2005. Yeah, hanging on the wall in the church, right? Like they're everywhere in our churches. Yeah, so it's a crazy wild thing, and the desperation to try and fix that really led to a lot of the current problems that are in the Jackson group.
It sounds like any kind of rebellion against Junior Jackson while he was alive got nipped in the bud, and he would just show them the door.
Right, you're exactly right. There wasn't really much that I would call rebellion, more what I call, I guess, division. There was a few times. There was, there was a time Brad Burgess. I don't know.
Oh, I know Brad.
Yeah. Heard of Brad Burgess? Yeah, he's got a message church over in Louisville. There was a time he came and they had different holiness standards than Faith Assembly did, and he ripped Brother Jackson, up one side and down the other on the platform. And so, there was a few times there was direct challenges like that, and of course he ended up showed the door, So there was a few times things like that happened, but it was more, as soon as Brother Jackson found out there was even something possibly going on, they were dealt with really quick. One time, one maybe you're familiar with, so there were some ministers that we financially supported in India, for example, and we found out that they were also taking money from Cloverdale. So they were on both of our dimes, right?
Well, that's not uncommon when you go offshore. They'll ask these guys for money, these guys for money, and they're interested in the money. They're not necessarily interested in what you have to say or what you believe.
Yeah. And so, anyways, once Brother Jackson found out that these people are possibly double agents, right? They're immediately dealt with, right? That way, because he didn't want any connection back to Cloverdale Bible Way, right? So, it was always dealt with right on the spot as soon as he found those things out.
So, moving ahead, what caused you to start asking questions about the message? And I know these things, certainly with me, It's not suddenly you woke up and say, oh, the message false. You got a question,
Right.
and you have a difficult time getting answers to the questions, and you talk to people and they don't want you to question. So what started your questioning the message? That brings us to the end of part 1 of our interview with Charles Paisley. We welcome you to come back next month to listen to part 2 of the interview. If you have any questions, please go to the offthelshelf.life website. There is space for comments and questions at the bottom of each episode. I have asked Charles if he would answer any questions that our listeners might post. Or you can send me an email at rod@offthelshelf.life. Please let us know if there are any issues or questions that you think we should address, or someone we should consider interviewing. Thank you very much for listening, and remember that God loves you and is not afraid of your questions. Have a great week.